Welcome to this webcast. It's wonderful to imagine you. Jonathan Foust here, and it is summer, and I am reaching out to you from an undisclosed location on Cape Cod. Got the summer tan on, lots of swimming, the high humidity hair, the whole scene. What's coming up is a short meditation and then a talk from the archives, which I hope you'll enjoy. More about that. It's all about how focus can be a transformational practice in your life. So, first, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to our producer, Glenn Harrison. Also, just to let you know that Rita Moran, our mindful movement teacher, is traveling this month, but there are links to her mindful movement classes online on my Facebook page and in the newsletter and on my website. Let's see. Oh, yeah. I've got a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, one that comes out occasionally offering my best photography and summaries of talks and upcoming events. And let's see. Oh, yeah. This is all offered in the spirit of dana, or generosity. No charge, no access to these practices, which are considered priceless. So many times in my life when I've been able to do a retreat or listen to a talk without having to pay when I didn't have the funds, that has really inspired me to make this available to all who really want access. So if you feel inspired to support me in this, thank you very, very much. So in the meantime, let's take a look at some techniques for cultivating a greater sense of focus. And the interesting thing about practice is focus is part of meditation. It's not the whole thing. Concentration is a powerful tool, but it's not necessarily the end result. It's not where we end up. And so part of the alchemy of practice is combining two things that seem somewhat contradictory. One is deep relaxation along with concentration. So in this short meditation, we will do a little exploration of these two elements. If you like, you might close your eyes. And you might take a few moments to let yourself move and stretch a little bit, maybe flow a little bit from side to side. Maybe draw your shoulders up toward your ears and squeeze the shoulders, squeeze the hands, squeeze forearms. Hold nice and tight, taking a long, deep breath. Hold the breath, squeeze the shoulders up toward the ears, and then gently relax. Let the shoulders flow down, soften, relax down through the elbows. Relax the palms. And notice what happens when you just relax your breath and feel where the breath is the most predominant right now. Take a moment to sense if you could soften your forehead. Imagine the forehead smooth and just track any subtle sensations as you sense there. If you bring your attention to all the little muscles around your eyes, is it possible to soften the muscles around your eyes? And with your attention now, can you scan down through the cheeks and the jaw and feel the muscles of the face from the inside out? You might feel these micro expressions softening. You might feel your face kind of like the face of a marble statue, smooth. Is it possible to relax your tongue? Let your tongue fill your lower jaw and soften the entire jaw away from the skull. And is it possible to relax even the root of your tongue down into your throat? Can you feel or imagine the weight of your shoulders, the weight of your arms, and track down through the elbows, down through the wrists, the backs of the hands, the palms, feeling the volume of the fingers and thumbs. Could you relax the belly and lower back and sensing down the length of the legs, relaxing and feeling the soles of the feet and the heels? And you might explore now, is there anything right now from the crown of your head down to the soles of your feet that might soften or relax or let go right now? Is there anything inside that could relax or soften or let go even more than that right now? And from this place of relaxation, of softening, you might bring your attention to your breath, noticing where you feel the breath right now. And I'd like to offer a few suggestions for exploring your breath in this little bit of time we have. These are some essential techniques that can be very helpful. But keep in mind that the breath may not be best for you. So you might explore sound if that's helpful, but these instructions are primarily for awareness of breath. As you feel the breath right now, you might explore what it's like to count the inhalations from 1 to 5. And notice the effect as you train your attention on the breath. Now, you're not controlling the breath. The breath is natural and free flowing. So, for the next minute or so, you might explore just gently counting the inhalation from 1 to 5 and then beginning again. And when you lose count, which will naturally occur, just start again. Can you sense the imprint or the effect of noting and counting the breath? The next exploration is to explore precisely where you feel the breath on the inside. Again, the breath is natural and free flowing. But with your awareness, just sense where you feel the breath and scan for any details of new sensations that you can discern as you feel the inflow and the outflow and the pause between the breaths. And again, notice the effect as you bring your attention again and again back to the felt sense of the breath and understanding the mind is naturally wandering away. So there's no judgment here. Here's a third exploration. This is very, very subtle. You can explore the following question. Is this inhalation shorter or longer than the inhalation preceding it? Is this in-breath shorter or longer than the in-breath preceding? And now, if you would, just drop all technique and just relax and feel. Can you sense the imprint or the effect of drawing your attention again and again to this felt sense of the breath? What could relax or soften or let go right now? And now, very gently, you can begin to deepen your breath. Let your body move a little bit from side to side and begin your transition. No hurry, no rush. And welcome back. The practice of meditation is very, very subtle. On one hand, it's simple. On the one hand, it's really quite complex. Concentration is one of the most powerful tools for meditation, but it's important to notice not the end result. However, when you can really focus your attention, there can be not only a deep sense of satisfaction in terms of what you can accomplish, but also concentration changes your state and can allow you to penetrate into deeper insights and to see more and more clearly into the nature of reality. So, this following talk is part one of a talk on the power of concentration and how concentration can truly, not exaggerating, change your life. I hope you enjoy the following talk. Blessings in your practice. Take good care. You know, some people have heroes that guide their life. Some of these heroes are the most powerful, profound teachers in the world of Jesus, of Buddha, Muhammad. Some are social leaders, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. I have a number of my own personal heroes that inspire me. And one of them is Dave Barry. If you're not familiar with Dave Barry, he's a humor writer for the Miami Herald, written many, many books. And if you know Dave Barry, you can't hear his name without smiling, which is amazing karma. I'd like to come back as Dave Barry. Well, maybe not, but maybe. And there's a reading that I like to offer about once a year or so, which is a description that he writes of sitting on an airplane. And if this feels like too much of a repeat, I try to keep this to once a year or once every 2 years, but this is just one of my favorite little readings. It's called The Avenging Flight Attendant of Doom. And this is only the first section. I'm in an airplane, strapped into my seat, no way to escape. For an hour, we've been taxiing around Miami International Airport while lightning tries to hit us. earlier, I was hoping that the plane might at some point actually take off and fly to our intended destination. But now I'm starting to root for the lightning, because a direct strike might silence the two women sitting in front of me. There's only one empty seat between them, but they're speaking at a decibel level that would be appropriate if one of them were in Cleveland. Also, they have blitherer's disease, which occurs when there's no filter attached to the brain, so that every thought the victim has, no matter how minor, comes blurting right out. This means that the rest of us passengers are being treated to a repartee such as this. First woman, I prefer a window seat. Second woman, oh, not me, I always prefer an aisle seat. That's just like my son. He lives in New Jersey, and he also prefers an aisle seat also. My sister-in-law works for a dentist in New Jersey. He's an excellent dentist, but he can't pronounce his R's. He says, I'm afraid you need a root canal. My brother-in-law just had that root canal. He was bleeding all over his new car, one of those Japanese ones, a Lexus. I prefer a Buick, but let me tell you, this insurance, who can afford it? I have a brother in the insurance business with angina. He prefers a window seat. Oh, not me. I always prefer an aisle seat. Now my daughter... And so it has gone on for 1 solid hour, a live broadcast of random neural firings. The harder I try to ignore it, the more my brain focuses on it. But it could be worse. I could be the flight attendant. The piece goes on. If you want to Google the avenging flight attendant of doom. But I love this reading because this represents the mind so well, at least my mind. Blitherer's disease. How there's no filter to what the mind generates. And that's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about, is the other side of that quality of mind that is blithering. And that's the quality of mind that can focus in the here and now. So I'd like to talk about the power of focusing your awareness and how it can transform your life truly. How focusing your mind is actually a mental training, and how despite the challenges, you need to celebrate the wins, because focusing your mind is not necessarily easy. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about how to create the ground for creating mindfulness, and how focus and concentration is really the preparation for opening into liberation. So this is part of a 3-part series on focus, flow, and let go or let be. And so here we're going to focus mostly on the focus part. I think many of us are familiar with the story of the Buddha and his awakening. Just very, very briefly, he was born into a wealthy family. The first part of his life, he was very protected, really protected from reality. As the story goes, his father, who was supposedly someone of very, very high esteem, a wealthy individual, was told by an astrologer that his son would either be a great spiritual teacher or a great leader, and he preferred the latter. So he went out of his way to protect his son from reality. And as the story goes, and again, it's a great allegory, he encountered what are considered the 4 heavenly messengers. He saw sickness, he saw old age, and he saw death. And he also saw a sannyasi. He saw a monk who had sort of renounced the world and seemed to have a quality of happiness and joy about him. So seeing that everyone gets sick, everyone gets old, everyone dies, but also seeing this very alive individual, that's what inspired him to set off on his journey. And really, it's the classic story of the hero's journey. And his practice moved from asceticism to really cultivating the middle way, not too tight, not too loose. But here's what he said. He said, and again, allegedly, I reached the highest degree of purity by practicing sila, samadhi, and panya. This is the path that leads to enlightenment. Okay, so what are these things? Well, in the vernacular, number one, clean up your act. Number two, concentrate your mind. And three, use your concentrated mind to investigate what's real. So sila it's morality, it's ethical conduct. It's making sure that you're not creating harm in the world and you're not creating distraction. So it's looking at your behaviors. Samadhi refers to meditation, to concentrating your mind. And pana or panya refers to wisdom. That is when you apply sort of concentrated awareness, investigating reality, it's the wisdom that arises out of that. And so he outlined the Eightfold Path, or kind of 8 steps, and they're not really linear steps, but the guidelines of having the right view of life, of making sure your aspirations in life are kind of dialed in, being aware of your speech and how that can create harm, how that can create a more wholesome quality, looking at your conduct, looking at your livelihood to see if your livelihood is aligned with awakening, and then to focus on correct effort in your life, not too tight, not too loose, cultivating mindfulness or non-judging awareness, and cultivating concentration. So in my own practice, I learned meditation, thankfully, at age 15, and I learned transcendental meditation. And while it's deeply Hindu in its roots, it was kind of repackaged for the Western mind. I kind of think of transcendental meditation as sort of the McDonaldization of meditation. And in many ways, it was, well, not in many ways, but in most ways, it was incredibly successful. What they did is they kind of standardized how you learn this technique. It falls into the category of concentration. Instead of a sensation such as breath or sound or feeling, you use a mantra or a sound. So when the mind wanders, you come back to your mantra, just as you come back to your breath. And while it falls under concentration, it's a different technique and has slightly different results. Of course, ultimately, everything's pointing at the moon, but it's more of a mental technique. It's more mentally calming, I think. I was very into the practice. It changed my life at age 15, from being kind of very fearful and very anxious to much more confident, much more calm, much more creative. I'm deeply, deeply grateful. I went on to do intensive practices. I went on to explore teaching the technique. And then I kind of got hijacked into other practices. So I was very into this practice of TM, and because it was sort of westernized, there wasn't a lot of archaic, esoteric language. But I remember hanging out with a meditation buddy that I met who was very into Buddhist meditation. And as he was talking about his practice, he's throwing out all these words in Pali, where he's saying, well, the shamatha practice really feeds the vipassana practice, which really I think is going to lead to moksha. That's my opinion. I remember thinking to myself, I don't need to learn any new language to meditate. This is a practice that's endemic unto itself. And I was quite reactive around, I'm not going to learn new vocabulary. I just need to meditate. And of course, funnily enough, I found myself immersed in an ashram later, immersed in the Sanskrit technology, and then later into Pali and so forth. And actually, what I have found is these distinctions in different traditions really, really helpful. If you have done any study or read any books about meditation or mindfulness, You may find, as many do, you're reading, and then suddenly you get these great insights because the words on the page actually mirror your own experience. So it's a very powerful way to sort of corroborate your own experience, to kind of see what arises when you study these different traditions and different angles and different perspectives. And one really interesting word in Pali, again the original language of the Buddha, is bhavana. And the word bhavana means bringing something into existence, applying yourself and developing something. So what you're doing in meditation is you're applying yourself in a particular way to develop something. I think it's safe to say what we're developing here are the states of mind that are conducive to liberation and happiness. You're cultivating the attitudes that optimize being more free in your life. And what's curious about this is, in order to create that sense of freedom and happiness, the sense of bhavana, or bringing something forward, requires some willpower. It requires some resilience, it requires some focus, and it requires some concentration. So concentration, it's power. It's your capacity to stay on track in the midst of distraction. It's laser focus. And I'm sure you know what it's like when you're focused, how much you can get done in life. So when you look at this practice of meditation, when you look at cultivating non-judging awareness, when you look at increasing freedom and happiness, you have to set the conditions for this first. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things I have found so helpful is when I think about concentration and cultivating focus, it's not very sexy. It's more like hard work. It's more like dragging yourself back again and again, starting over and over and over. But the truth is, when you start to develop your capacity to focus, the results are really nothing less than extraordinary. If you have been at all exploring insight meditation or vipassana meditation, you may have heard the word jhana. Jhana. And if you're more of a yogophile, if you come more from the yoga tradition, you may have heard the word dhyan or dhyana. Dhyana. And this term refers to meditation, and more specifically to concentration or one-pointed awareness. And the states that you can develop and cultivate are so fascinating. And they're really curiously paradoxical, because you're cultivating one-pointed awareness, but also you're deeply relaxing into the concentration. There's a quality of allowing and a quality of softening. And it turns the practice inside out. Now, this is part of the sizzle. I'm not a very concentrated person, as much as I wish I was. And I find that I'm not a natural contemplative. So I kind of need to meditate with a gun to my head. Even after all these years of practice, even though I know it's good for me, there's something in me that resists meditation. And I find what's very, very helpful is to use discipline and commitment to sort of kind of force me into the gates of practice, which is why I find going on retreats very, very helpful. When I'm on an intensive meditation retreat, it works really, really well for me. When you do an intensive retreat, you're getting rid of the distractions. You're putting away phones, computers, reading. You're putting away conversation, eye contact. You're holding yourself accountable, and you show up. You just show up. And what I find is it's really, really helpful for me. There's a schedule. The bells ring, the bell rings, you walk, the bell rings, you sit, the bell rings, you eat. And on 1 month-long retreat I had a particularly powerful experience of what's possible when you cultivate concentration. It was for me a taste of the jhanas. And the jhanas are altered states of consciousness brought on by concentration. There are a number of jhanas, and each yields more concentration than one previous. This is, for me, somewhat esoteric, but at the same time, I think it's really, really helpful just to take a little bit of time to explore these. And I'd like to share with you just a very, very simple technique that you might try. We'll try it in a little bit. As you get more concentrated, you're actually cultivating more and more of a capacity to experience a pleasure and to experience joy, to experience kind of an upwelling of being. And they're kind of addictive, to tell you the truth. There's this sense of like, oh my gosh, this is it. But it's important to say before we kind of move into this that these states of deep absorption and concentration are not an end in and of themselves. That they help you to prepare your mind so you can more effectively examine reality and discover the deeper truths that can lead to freedom and happiness. So I'd like to give you a little taste of the entry point. But let me say again, before we dive in here, that there are plenty of resources on this topic. There are teachers who are much more experienced and much more skilled than I am as a guide when it comes to the deeper concentration absorption practices. So just know that they're out there. The first thing we explore is what's called access concentration. This is when you have an object, which for many will be the breath. For many may be sound or the felt sense in the palms. And it's important to know that you got to find one anchor that works for you, and then you're helpful to kind of stay with it. But some people find the breath is very, very challenging. So you're not limited to this. And again, you'll find traditions that will tell you different focal points are the best. So you need to find what works for you. And in essence, what you do is you're focusing on your anchor. And what happens is, of course, you see the mind wandering again and again and again and again. But the more you stay with it, the more you begin to recognize the patterns of the mind. You begin to recognize the top 10 stories that take you away. You become more aware of everything that's between you and the present moment. And that's can be a very, very rich part of the practice. But when you're doing concentration, you're not doing a lot of investigation. You're not taking time to kind of contemplate the worry that arises. You're just bringing yourself back again and again and again. So let's say you're focusing on breath. And what you're noticing is you're not trying to control the breath in any way. The breath is sometimes long, the breath is sometimes shallow. And you're returning again and again and again. Now, what most people find, and what I find in my own practice, is that you can spend most of your meditation just starting over again, for the 1,000th time, waking up, coming back. And it was at some point in one of the longer intensive retreats I was doing, where for the 1,000th time, coming back to my anchor, and then suddenly I realized, oh, this is a training. I'm actually training my mind to sit like a puppy. Can I just treat the puppy mind with compassion, bring it back, invite it to sit? And so in many ways, either your entire meditation or the first part of your meditation is going to be, I like to think of as paying your dues. If you're tired, you're going to notice how tired you are. If you're distracted, you'll notice how distracted you are. If you're caught in hypervigilance and worry, you're going to notice that. You're going to notice if the mind is lost primarily in fantasy, if you're worried, if you're angry. All of that you see. And over time, you start to rest more and more in the here and now, which is why sometimes at the end of a meditation, you'll feel like the entire time was just rowing against the wind. And that's okay. And a lot of brain studies have shown that you're getting tremendous benefit when you're starting over and over and over again. And one tradition calls it de-stressing, which is a great term, actually. You know, you're lost in anxiety. You recognize that you're lost in anxiety. You come back to the breath. Something let go. And if it let go in the mind, there's some corresponding letting go in the body. There has to be. We're a mind-body matrix. But what you can do is, when you start to get more concentrated, when you have a sustained sense of focus, you can actually turn to a pleasant sensation. And then you can let go of your anchor and just feel that pleasant sensation. I'll guide you through this. And then it's kind of the hard part, because you're not doing anything else. You're just focusing entirely on the pleasant sensation. The mind comes, the mind goes. Sometimes you need to go back to concentration practice. But sometimes the pleasantness can kind of grow. It can get stronger. It's not a linear process at all. So let's try this. Let's just try this on. If you like, you can close your eyes and maybe let your body sway a little bit to the left and to the right. We're going to take probably about 3 or 4 minutes for this practice here. And don't worry about the mind wandering or not being able to concentrate or to be present. Just trust that these words in some way may kind of inform and inspire you on some level. And I'd like to invite you, unless the breath is traumatic for you, to let your anchor be on your breath. If the breath is really difficult or it's aggravating for you, then feel free to choose another anchor, such as sound or the felt sense in the palms. And if you would, take a moment now to choose a specific focal point on the inside. For some, the nostrils or the septum can be really powerful. Others find the movement of the belly to be a really powerful anchor, and part of the reason why, I think, is that in order to feel the breath of the belly, you have to soften the belly. And when you soften the belly, you invoke kind of a systemic relaxation response. A third option, of course, is to sense the general sense of the breath. But take a few moments now and guide your attention to the feeling on the inside. And I'd like to offer these 3 instructions that I find to be very, very helpful. The first is, you might explore counting the breath at the top of the inhalation, just noting 1, and then at the top of the inhalation 2, and you can do that to say 5 and then start over. So we'll take the next minute. Now, the next way to help you focus is to really sense the location of the feeling on the inside. How precisely, how intimately can you locate the feeling? Just track that feeling for a little while. The next instruction is to sense, is the length of this inhalation any different than the inhalation preceding? And just track what that feels like, how that affects the mind. Let the awareness be deeply immersed, absorbed into the experience on the inside. And now very, very gently, you might just sense, is there anywhere inside that feels pleasurable? And for many people, if you soften and relax the palms, if you sense the space inside the thumbs and the fingers and palms, there could be a quality of pleasure here. Or there may be a feeling of pleasure in the heart. And let your attention now move to the feeling of pleasure wherever you feel it. And you're moving your attention now from your breath to this quality of pleasure. So you're sustaining your attention on the feeling of pleasure and now do nothing else. Just be with it. Notice now the quality of feeling, the quality of presence. And this process of absorbing the mind through concentration, and then very, very gently shifting your attention to a pleasant sensation, and simply resting and being with that pleasant sensation. Now, if you like, you can begin to deepen your breath. You might let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right. And if you can, just let go of any judgment, if there's any judgment about how well you were concentrated or how well you did this practice. That's immaterial. You may have had a taste here of using these techniques of of absorption, of concentration, of using counting with breath, of refreshing the feeling on the inside and noticing how there could be subtle shifts, and then noticing if the length of the inhalation is different than the length preceding. These are ways of sort of like getting the mind more and more absorbed and kind of fascinated in the experience. It's important to say here, we're not doing any analysis or any investigation. It's kind of like you're either on point or you're not. But then you can, when it feels right, when you have that sense of absorption and presence, you can shift your attention to somewhere pleasant. And for me, as in with many, many people, when you really relax and soften your hands, when you soften your hands and feel from the inside, you may feel tingling or pulse or energy, and it can have a quality of really deep pleasure to it. And when you have that sense of concentration and you move from your breath or the object and just bring your attention to that pleasant sensation, the practice here is just to be. Don't mess with it. Don't play games with it. You want to be a human being, just being with it. Now, as you begin to feel more, interesting things can arise. I was on a different meditation retreat than the one I've been referring to, and I had an interview with the teacher, and lots of energy was flowing. It was really just feeling so much, like it just turned on the energy in my body. And she asked me, "Are you having success?" I said, "Yes." And then I started to tell her like how I could move the energy around. I could feel the energy in my back, and I could sort of move it through my torso to the front. And she looked at me and she said, "Don't play games." And I realized, ooh, absolutely busted, because I was playing games. I was trying to be somebody special with the energy that was arising, and part of the practice here is to really let it be. So when you have access, this sort of access concentration, when you can really sustain attention on your anchor, and you sort of make that shift, and often it just happens spontaneously. You don't have to try. In fact, trying is going to mess it up. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. You'll realize that the pleasure, like that pleasurable sensation, it comes and goes. And it only really arises when you move into being. And what I find so frustrating in my own practice is that feeling of pleasure, and it's referred to as kind of a rapture. There's sort of this upwelling of joy that can occur when you just simply rest in pleasant sensation once you're concentrated. Is that you can really only access it when you're being. You can't fake it, you can't force it, you can't rush it. But just to say a little bit more about this, if you have some experiences with this, is that the more you kind of like hang out with the pleasurable sensation, again, from that state of relaxed concentration, the energy begins to awaken a little bit. It can be subtle, it can be pleasurable. Sometimes it's intense. Sometimes it's not that pleasurable. It's almost like your finger is in an electrical socket. Sometimes there's swaying. Sometimes there's this sort of like, there's a lot of energy moving. The idea here is when you sort of make that subtle shift in your practice, is the mind's going to be thinking like, "Oh my God, look what I'm doing. Isn't this cool?" You want to ignore the background thinking as much as you can. The thinking is still there. But allow yourself to just be with. Now, an interesting thing here is if you've noticed the statues of the Buddha, that little smile is a very subtle smile. That's a very powerful teaching in that image, because this arising of this upwelling is actually very pleasurable. Again, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's big. But when you really slow down and when you really, really feel that intense quality of pleasure that arises from opening into presence, it only comes when you can move into that deep sense, the paradox of being deeply concentrated, and then at the same time being deeply relaxed. You have to kind of wait for the experiences to come to you. But I need to back up a little bit, because you may recall I talked about those 3 stages of clean up your act, get concentrated, use the concentrated mind to investigate reality. So we've talked about like the concentration, but we didn't talk about the cleaning up your act part. So in the little bit of time left, I'd like to touch on that. As you can imagine, or as you may have felt, getting concentrated, getting relaxed, sensing this quality of piti, of pleasure, is very, very subtle. and the winds of the mind can move you off in all kinds of directions. And that's why the foundation of the practice and the foundation of many, many different spiritual traditions is ethical conduct, or sila, as is referred to in this tradition. And you can sense perhaps why this is so important. To do this very, very deep inner work of getting deeply present moment concentrated and then opening into the subtler states that arise out of concentration, you got to remove the distractions. You have to avoid creating pain so you can start to calm the mind. And part of that is around avoiding harming other people, around cultivating good deeds, about freeing yourself from guilt and from remorse. The idea here in ethical conduct is that you're reducing craving and desire. Because when you're not looking out there for happiness, you can begin to turn your attention to the inherent happiness within. So if you look at all kinds of different traditions, what these traditions point to is create the riverbanks for your behavior. We have the 10 Commandments in Christianity. We have the yamas and niyamas in the system of yoga, which are very similar to the 10 Commandments. And we have sila in the Vipassana tradition. Every great religion has these guidelines. And the guidelines are not so much about holding you back, more about setting you free. So, a little bit on these jhanas, on the kind of the jhana states. They get very, very esoteric. But once you're concentrated, you then turn your attention to the pleasant sensations. And you're moving from your breath to just being with the pleasant sensations. And then different states will arise that are more and more subtle. What I noticed when I first experienced this, kind of the entry point of like the upwelling of pleasure, kind of the rush of energy, just that sense of really, really deep joy, of like not desiring anything other than what's here. At first I thought, I'm done. I think I'm enlightened. It's so humiliating looking back on it, but many people feel that, just that sense of like, oh my God, I've arrived. But then you realize that the pleasant sensations are actually pretty erratic. They come and go. So then, as you explore more, you begin to look, what's more subtle than that? Is there anything more stable than just pleasure? And then you begin to turn your attention to joy. Well, there's actually an inner joy that's independent of externals, and then that becomes your focal point. And even more subtle than that is contentment, because contentment is actually a little more subtle, a little more stable than joy. And then you can turn your attention to the utter deep peacefulness, and then into the infinity of space. And then it moves to these very, very subtle states. I'll just name them here because they're kind of expansive. You become aware of the infinity of consciousness. The quality there's no thing, there's no perception or non-perception, and ultimately to kind of what was called cessation, which is just where it's like the absence of any desire whatsoever. It gets very esoteric. Some say there are 4 jhanas and then 5 formless absorptions. And if you look at some of the teachings, it's, again, very, very esoteric. But the interesting thing is, and I want to close with this, is that it's mapped out. I find that so exciting. And it refers back to the core principles, the core insights of the Buddha. The first, suffering occurs when you're in human form. Stress, suffering, dissatisfaction, part of the human experience. If you can pause and turn and examine that, you'll see that there's a cause. The cause of all stress and suffering and dissatisfaction is some form of clinging, some form of hanging on. The third insight, you can let go. You can let go of whatever you're holding on to and then experience what happens when you let go. And the fourth, that there's a path that leads to the release of suffering, dissatisfaction, and stress. There's so much more to say about this, and I think kind of what I need is a part 2 on focus and concentration. But what's so powerful about this is that when you get concentrated in your meditation practice, you can begin to open up these inner worlds. When you get more concentrated in life, you can begin to accomplish amazing things, particularly when your focus is aligned with what you really, really want. So developing focus and concentration is a tremendous aid internally, as well as an aid in bringing your life forward in a way that most enlivens you. And to me, that's tremendously exciting. That this cultivation of will and focus and gathering of attention is actually a gathering of power. And when that power is aligned, when it's truly aligned with what you really, really want, it gets juicy. Let's close with a short yet brief reflection. If you like, you can close your eyes. And if you like, you can slow down your breath. And allow yourself, if you like, to feel this incredible alchemy of relaxing and softening, and at the same time, focusing and sensing the granular experience on the inside. Can you sense this paradox of deep relaxation and at the same time a quality of profound alertness? And can you imagine taking this concentrated mind and applying it inwardly to truly know and to see into the nature of reality? And can you imagine taking this sense of relaxed, concentrated power and turning it toward what most calls you in this life? This is the power of concentration, the power of focus. If you'd like, you can deepen your breath. If you'd like, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope this was helpful in your practice. And thank you so much, and many, many blessings.